Hi guys, welcome back to another week of e-learning. I am going to kind of talk you through this creating a letter form based off of one of your photographic alphabet captures. So I want you to choose one of your letters from your photographic alphabet, and you can either print it off or just pull it up on the screen in front of you. You might want to turn it into, or actually you should probably already have it on your phone, so that would be easy to just pull it up on your phone and use it as inspiration. You are going to create a letter form that is inspired by your photo. So for example, I'm using Xander's A, I believe it is. He hasn't completed the critique yet, so I'm not quite sure, 100% sure what letter it is that he was going for, but to me, I can see the implied A here in his, here I go. Let me click on that again. In his capture. And so I'm going to just kind of talk you through how to create this letter form based off of your photographic inspiration. So the first thing that you're going to need is some sort of straight edge. Now you may not have a ruler at home. If you do, that's obviously going to be the easiest, but if you don't, you could use like the edge of a DVD case. You could use a cutting board, the edge of a cutting board. You could use the hard side, like the edge of a book, a box, a rigid box, something like this, but you're going to want to go ahead to create some guidelines. You'll want to have more of a rigid, like straight edge, some sort of straight edge that you can use. A blank sheet of paper. This is, if all you have is lined, then that's all you have. But if you have any sort of like copy paper or, completely blank sheet of paper, that's helpful. We're going to start out, I'm going to start out actually with the baseline for this letter. Now I can choose, like this A is obviously the orientation is going to be more vertical. So I'm going to go ahead and use a vertical, orientation with a page, and I'm going to create a baseline. So remember, your baseline is the line, and we really didn't get a chance to go over this in class, which is part of why I'm doing the video. But this becomes like where your lower part of your letter is going to rest. So if I start with this baseline, and these are just like anatomical like guidelines or construction lines for creating a letter form. And essentially kind of the point, I'm kind of backtracking a little bit, but kind of the point of this lesson is to get you thinking about, we talked about like type sensitivity, we looked for shapes and type, and now I want you kind of thinking about like how the designer goes about designing a font or a typeface and all of the little characteristics that are involved. And so really we're working on like kind of creating an inspiration for a display typeface, like something that would maybe be used, or it wouldn't have to be display. It could be sans serif or serif or, a block serif if you want, but it's all inspired by one of your letters, maybe the favorite one or the one that you feel like you could most easily see how you could transfer it into like the style for a typeface. So again, this is our baseline. This is the bottom. This is where our letter will rest. This doesn't mean that you can't have any of your parts of your letter fall below, like maybe the serif or a stroke comes a little bit below the baseline, but it's really like the resting point. You can think of it like the ground. Like if you had something that was spiky, it might go through the ground. And so like the ground is, where everything rests, but things can fall below the baseline just a little bit sometimes. So what I'm going to do is basically draw this A. I'm going to try and create this A. I'm also going to do what's called the cap height. So I'm starting out with another guideline that's just kind of telling me the overall height, again, where the letter will end. This will help the letter to be more uniform in my sketching. So I'm going to call this cap height, okay? All right, so now that I have this, now I can be very, very symmetrical about this. And eventually maybe I'll get more to that point of like actually measuring out since I do have a ruler available. But for right now, I'm gonna start with my sketch. And I'm gonna take note of, just like I would with regular drawing practice, I'm gonna take note of the overall like placement of where this crossbar comes through on this A, and it's kind of angled up. So I'm going to kind of notice those angles, going back to like drawing skills, or I don't know if you learned this in intro, but you can go back to like basically laying your pencil along to figure out what those angles are. So I'm going to go ahead and put another line at about halfway through. So this is typically what would be referred to as the X height. But since I am not drawing an X, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of find a middle zone. this sketch, again, these are just guidelines for letting me know, you know, maybe how wide the A is going to be. I could draw another line for like how wide I want the A to be. So I'm just kind of creating a box, creating guidelines to improve my drawing, because, you know, letter forms are going to have some amount of symmetry to them. Even if they are drawn in a very organic way, they would still have symmetry. So I figured out my cap height. This is what's called my X height. Again, if I had an X in the alphabet that I was working with, that would give my determination of like what that like lowercase height is really for the letters. And that's where I'm also going to place my crossbar. So my crossbar, you know, if I look at this drawing, I kind of see that it's angled up, and in the center it comes up a little higher. So it's my choice. Like, I could start out with whatever that fixture is, and you know, if you want to use your ruler to kind of help you draw right now, I'm just going to freehand it. This is my first draft. You might use multiple sheets of paper for this. You will most likely need to. So this is kind of my first draft. And again, I'm just basing. It might have the proportions off a little bit. This is a sketch, so I can always go back and I can redraw and correct and fix and all of that. And then I'm going to use this angle that I see here. And if I determine, and I do determine, that I kind of made the width too wide, then I can just adjust it. So you're just kind of sketching at this point. So very rough sketch. I'm trying to figure out what would this letter, if I were to create a typeface based off of this one letter, what would the characteristics of that letter be? So I'm just kind of sketching, basically creating this A from Xander's. Now, okay, and see, I went too wide, so I'm going to have to really make that a lot more steep. Again, this is why we kind of start out with a rough sketch. There we go. And if I were to use Xander's, you know, image as like my inspiration, then that would start to play into how I would create this typeface. Here I kind of have it somewhat symmetrical on this side. And you may be wondering, well, why aren't you using a ruler right now? I totally could. Like, I could use a ruler right now to make things a little more straight, but sometimes for me, like, using a ruler, it just kind of takes away from the creative process, because through drawing and sketching and having to figure out like creating some of these straight lines, maybe I have a new conclusion. Like, maybe I start to see that, okay, I would like to come up a little higher on this side to add in and create more symmetry. So far you can start to see that I've like started to create this letter form or this font, again, based on Xander's A. If I had other examples with me, guys, I would probably use them, but Xander had a really good example for me. So now I'm going to think about like this overall distance. I'm looking at like the negative space and those openings. Are those the same on either side? If not, I would probably go back and make some corrections. Again, just some like drawing 101 skills, learning how to like see and create things in proportion. This sketch, you know, because again of our limitations right now, you're really, you know, doing some things that are outside of the box. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then I am going to go ahead and create the thickness for the sides. Now I have decided I'm going to alter some things, and you will find that you will want to have an inspiration in the end, but you will also want to simplify some things. Like, I'm not going to draw all the stuff that's on top or this thing hanging down. I think it's like the arm for the tripod. Instead, I'm going to start to kind of simplify some shapes so that I can, you know, develop my letter form. Like, if I were thinking about like what would the characteristics be that would display unity or continuity among all the typefaces. And notice I like ran off the side of my page. That's okay. I can go back later, correct it, redraw it, do another version. But what I'm seeing as I look at this, like the thing I like the most is I like these like bars. I really like how that kind of cuts through on that A. It becomes very interesting to me visually, and it makes the letter form more interesting. So where you build unity with your letter form is where you start noticing, like, I want this opening and this opening to be symmetrical. I want them to be the same. They're straight across from each other. I want all of my strokes. So maybe I do make this one a bit thicker, but these two should have about the same thickness, and they should be the same distance. Like, notice right now that's not happening, and that's probably part of why like I ended up running off the page, because my opening should be more like this. So like I should have a smaller opening to make it mimic that side. And then I should also think about this angle that I was at. I mean, if I take that angle and I lay it this direction, I'm close, but I still have too long of a crossbar on that right side. So I would need to change my angles a little bit. Now, maybe you do like me, maybe you keep going back and erasing right now, or maybe you start over with another draft. If you want to do another draft, that's fine. I would now need to thin up the sides of this stroke because I want this stroke to have the same width. And I mean, again, it's a rough sketch right now, but now I kind of have, like, based on Xander's really cool A that he found, I kind of have an idea of what I would want my letter form to look like. And maybe I would experiment, like where the tripod, that's what he photographed, where the tripod has these like rings that come through, maybe I would add some of those in. But you know what? Some of those rings, like here, I'll do another one on this side. Some of those rings maybe aren't necessary. Like that's one thing you want to keep thinking, you know, you want to, I mean, you're creating a display font, so it can have some like fancy stuff to it and some pizzazz, but you don't want it to become so complicated that we notice, like, you don't need to draw all the random stuff that's not symmetrical. The goal is to simplify so that we get a clear idea of what your letter form is, and so that you could replicate this. If, let's say, you were going to do now a W or something in the same font or same style. So this is how we establish unity among parts, is through making, at least with letter form design, is by making the strokes all the same thickness or width. And then your openings or your negative space should have symmetry as well. Now, for some of you, you may want to draw that vertical. This maybe would have been a good guideline to draw from the beginning. Again, this is just kind of drawing 101. But if you draw, you know, a vertical, then that would like help you to separate out the two halves of your letter. You could even create quadrants so that you maintain some sort of like symmetry in your design. Of course, if I would go back and create this letter, in fact, let me do it really quickly. I'm going to grab another piece of paper here. You need to hear all the background information. Obviously, I'm a pro at this video stuff. Where did I put the paper? Here we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do really quickly is like set this off to the side. I'm going to show you those guidelines. I'm going to go ahead and actually divide the paper in half with a vertical, just creating my guidelines, creating a baseline down here on the bottom. Ooh. One reminder with your ruler, that was good. Reminder there, put all your tension in your straight edge hand and then let your ruler just slide along for your guidelines, okay? So instead of creating the thickness or the width, I'm just gonna go ahead and create that center line, the baseline, and the cap height. I'm also gonna go ahead and do the X height just so that I establish where that crossbar should come through on my A, and I wanted it to be a little higher than center. Like I didn't want it completely even because I wanted the lower part of the A to be able to kind of angle up, of that crossbar to be able to angle up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure out. So on the bottom from the center, I'm going to measure out, and I think I will do 4 inches on either side of that center point. So 4 inches here, 4 inches here. And then I think I want the top of my A to be about 1 inch in thickness total. So that tells me that I want my strokes to be about 1/2 inch, because, you know, the top of the A is where those two strokes would come together. So this is gonna help me to keep like a really clean typeface and very symmetrical typeface, because from the start, I've kind of started creating my measurements. So from here, I will now create a 1/2 inch stroke here at the bottom. So I'm gonna put a 1/2 inch here, and I'm gonna put a 1/2 inch here. And so I've determined that that 1/2 inch is the thickness of my stroke. Now we'll see if I like that in the end. Again, this could just be a draft, maybe not. I'm using that center point because I know that's a 1/2 inch from where I drew. So you can see I've really created already a lot of continuity. And then I need this like center point here. So I'm gonna determine the overall thickness of that center point. I don't want it to be, I think I'll make it a 1/2 inch again for right now. So I'm just putting a 1/4 inch on either side of that center point. I'm gonna have to do the same thing at the top because 2 points helps us to get a well-measured line. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those 2 things at the top, and that will let me know that where it runs in to the top is going to be symmetrical and clean and maintain that thickness. Then at the bottom is kind of where it gets stylized. So it kind of curves around. I'm gonna go ahead and curve it for now. Now I may go back and correct it. And now I'm gonna figure out the angle. Now, if you have any sort of like protractor or compass or anything and you want to like really work on those angles, then go ahead and do that. For me, when I'm figuring out angles, I kind of look at how it crosses through the crossbar and like where I want it to cross and where I want it to end on the A, because I don't have any sort of tools like that, like a protractor or compass or any way of kind of determining my angles. So I'm really gonna eyeball it and think about like where it's hitting my A and intersecting. Is it intersecting at the same point? Hopefully I'll get to a pretty similar point. Again, I know that I want my stroke to be a 1/2 inch in length, so I kind of have a good idea of where to mark that 1/2 inch from the bottom of that crossbar and all the way up to the 1/2 inch. Up here, I'm gonna go up a 1/2 inch again, because that lets me know where I want it to end. Up a 1/2 inch. You see, I'm like, based on, again, Xander's letter, I have, oof, I must have gotten off with my measurement. Nope, it's just an angle, so it's giving an interesting illusion. Let's see what happens here. If I don't like it, I can straighten it out. I didn't really like it. I liked it more like straightened out. So there we go. I'm gonna do that. And I mean, obviously, like, this is your design. Like, you can make those decisions as you go, like, just like I just did. I didn't like how it was turning out, so I went ahead and made some adjustments. And now I'm gonna curve it because I kind of liked that curve that was created. I'm gonna keep my curve the same on the top and the bottom. I need to start here though, where it intersects. And I'm just kind of erasing, like getting rid of all the extras, the things I do not need, to make it appear as though it wraps around that A. I can erase out my guidelines. Anything that's a little awkward. Must have had some pink crayon on the bottom of the ruler because it definitely got on my page here. But now you can see how this has become a much more finished creation here for a typeface. I'm gonna do the same thing here with my curves, where it intersects. And I could make it less curvy there to make it mimic the other side. Erase out the lines I don't need. You see I've just maintained a lot of unity through the stroke width for this A. I'm just kind of erasing out everything that is no longer needed. I mean, I have a lot of like precision, and I have created my own letter form. Now, in doing this, I mean, this is pretty cool. I mean, let's be real. I created my own letter form based on Xander's awesome A submission. But, you know, I mean, let's be real. Like, maybe I'm not finished with it. Like, maybe I decide, hey, this kind of looks like that part of the A over on the side. Like, maybe I want to make all of it look that way, you know? And I could fix my curves because I think my curves are a little sloppy over here. They're not so, I don't know, my left side is my weak side. Or maybe I want to finish off all the ends of my letter with a curve now to maintain continuity among all the parts. That would be one way that would really help with that unity factor. I'll kind of show you what I did here. At my baseline, I just placed a little bit of a curve on the end of the strokes for the letter, and that just brought in a lot of continuity. And if I were now to, you know, create an actual typeface, I have a really good basis. I mean, you could start to see how this could turn into a typeface. I would probably do something on the top as well. Like, I would think about how I'm finishing the top of it. It feels a little awkward to me right now, how it's finished. Feels like a little like thick and heavy, so I don't know if I would round the top of it. I might choose to do that. I would experiment with it. You know, these are the things I want you to try and notice and look for as you're sketching and as you're drawing. Hopefully this has been helpful. I know it was long, and I apologize for that. I'm not the greatest at video making, but I didn't really know any other way. Most of my examples actually are at school, which was pretty infuriating to figure out, but I think that this is a great way to like segue from everything you've learned with type anatomy and then type shapes in your last submission to now working with like actually creating a typeface. If you want to make it even more fancy, you could fill it in before submission. Like you could fill it in with a black marker if you wanted to. You know, like maybe, I don't know, but maybe if I filled it in with a black marker, maybe I would choose to leave these spaces like white. Like that could be cool. I mean, you can change your design. It doesn't have to be exactly what you thought in the beginning. You can just keep morphing it. Just remember to maintain unity and to simplify. So let me see, my screen fell asleep here. So from Xander's like tripod A now to my, A, which looks like pipes fitting together almost, but is definitely inspired by Xander's photo. So anyway, you guys have a great week. I hope you're all doing great, and feel free to reach out if you have more questions.